Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Marcos Luis here. Thank you for joining me. This is OneMicNite. You already know. My guest today is incredible. He is a writer and author of the book C.O.V.E.N. It's a brand new book that's out now. This is an exclusive interview. His name is Stephen Mark. So stick around and make sure you check out the conversation and get some inspiration and also 10 years of labor of love for this book. So you definitely want to pick it up. It's a sci-fi fantasy, and it's incredible. This is OneMicNite. Stick around. OneMicNite.com. So I think she's set up now. Keita P, you ready? Keita P! Keita P's in the house. Hi, everyone, and welcome to OneMicNite, the podcast that brings you stories of artists and people on their journey, helping to guide, answer questions, and motivate you in life and the business. You already know who I am. It's Marcos Luis, and I'm back. I took a little break, but you know I missed you, and thank you guys all for tuning in and looking at the old episodes. I see the numbers, so thank you very much for the support, and I hope that I'm inspiring you along the way. Today, I have an exclusive for you. My guest is incredible. He is an author and writer, and the author of the book called C.O.V.E.N., which has just hit the bookstores. It's a thrilling exploration of clandestine world of psychic warfare and covert operations. His name is Stephen Mark. Welcome him to the show. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate that.
Listen, I have questions.
I have answers.
The first question is, who is Stephen Mark?
Stephen Mark is my brother, an uncle, child of God, a creative storyteller through various creative outlets, I would say.
Where did this all begin for you as a creative?
Creative, as a creative in general, began as a child. In terms of my love of writing, that definitely came from my mother. My mother was a writer. She actually studied journalism when she was in school. And growing up, my love of sci-fi and fantasy kind of took off from there. I was that kid who got up at 7 a.m. on Saturday mornings to watch cartoons. I grew up reading comic books. Got my allowance. The first thing I did was run to the corner store to see what the latest issues of DC or Marvel came about. It just kind of flew from there. I came from a family of a lot of creatives, people who were into music. I have siblings that sang. I sang when I was younger. I went to a school for music and art in Harlem, which then moved to Lincoln Center. But I've been part of that creative community pretty much all my life.
So creative school, and where did well first where did the love for writing come in? I mean, I know you mentioned Saturday morning the comic books. I know we're of a certain age, and I too used to love the comic books, the Department of Justice League, and Saturday mornings, those type of things. And then it
Uh,
moved on to E.T., the extraterrestrial, those type of things. How did you hone in on that? As you got
like I
older.
said, my mother was a writer. She
Hmm.
loved to write, and I got that from her. But the sci-fi and honing in on that particular aspect of my creativity came from just trying to escape reality. I didn't have a bad childhood. I did not. It was a phenomenal childhood. I had a great family, but I was a child of divorce. I did have a couple of traumatic episodes as a child that, caused my mother to take me to therapy to kind of make sure I was okay. Um, and writing was just an escape for me, as were the comic books and the Saturday morning cartoons and the sci-fi movies, the Star Treks, the Star Wars, things like that. It allowed me to escape the bonds of practicality and reality and allow my imagination to just soar. Um, Writing in and of itself, uh, I was always writing something. I was a songwriter for a long time, so I did that. I did poetry, so I've had poetry published before.
Okay.
Um, but in terms of writing this novel, I, like I said, I was always a fan of sci-fi and fantasy, but there was always something a little predictable about how things went, or I would see something and go, okay, that could have been resolved like two acts back. Why are we still doing it? So I wanted to write something that I thought I would enjoy reading. And that's how C.O.V.E.N came about.
I love it. This is really interesting to me because two, one, how does a young man of color, get interested in reading books? That's number one, because, typically we're not reading books. That wasn't something that your mother would say, oh, go read a book. However, you had a mother who was a journalist. And two, how do you turn that into writing books? Because that's also something that we're not especially known for.
It's true. Especially, as you said, people of color. You talk about sci-fi writers, and the first name that comes up is Octavia Butler.
Mm,
Was a
right.
phenomenal sci-fi writer. Um, she dove a little bit further into Farscape, other planets, other dimensions, things like that. But just an outrageous writer. For me, um, it actually again started with my mother, and it kind of grew in terms of again watching the fact that there weren't a lot of people of color. When you looked at a lot of these shows, you didn't have a lot of people of color in, the original Star Trek series or the original Star Wars trilogies. Even somebody of color who did a voice, you look at Darth Vader, who was James Earl Jones.
Right.
But when they took the mask off,
Look who it is.
you know, and you think in terms of, well, you're talking about another galaxy. Why is it such a far notion to have James Earl Jones be the actual character? So it was a lot of that. It was a lot of not seeing myself represented a lot in the Saturday morning cartoons. I think Marvel um, kind of spurred that on a little bit. Let me backtrack. You asked about growing up reading. I actually did have a mother who and a grandparent who kind of instilled that reading in us. My family did not leave education to the school. We brought it home.
Mm,
So it was not left in the classroom in terms of what we had to learn growing up. We also had to learn how to communicate. And in doing that, reading was a huge part of it. I enjoyed the fact that when I read something, my own imagination could take me where the story was going. It wasn't something that was fed to me.
Which is huge. And I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off for 1 second.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Just by what you said, looking back, do you think that's pretty pivotal?
Yeah, I
That's
do.
pretty pivotal.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yes, I absolutely do. Because like I said, a TV show, I enjoyed the TV shows, I enjoyed the movies, but they were images that somebody else came up with that fed them to you. What I started to notice was when I read a book and enjoyed it and then went to see the movie did not have as much of an effect on me as the book did because, excuse me, my own imagination allowed me to visualize what I was reading versus somebody else spoon feeding me their images.
Yes. Yes.
And that kind of took off in terms of, me starting to write poetry and things like that. I allowed my imagination to dictate what the words were. And hopefully people who read C.O.V.E.N will take the same approach, that they'll be able to establish their own version of what's on the page. I have my own imagination as to what these characters look like, how they acted, how they spoke, but I would love for everybody to tell me, how they viewed it, what they got from it in that sense. So
Do you feel like today's society is losing that? Uh,
very much so.
mhm.
We're in
How
and
so?
we're in a ridiculously huge digital age, and a lot of what we get is spoon fed to us via the media. Um, you look at what just happened with the election, how people got their information by the trolling that was going on, not according to the facts and not according to what the candidates were actually saying, but the hearsay that came from what everybody was trying to sway decisions about. And it goes all the way into our youth. You see a group of kids or a group of teenagers who are all sitting in a circle and all of them are on their phones. None of them are talking to each other.
Right. Yeah.
Grew up being outside and playing, and that too led to the imagination because you're outside, you're playing tag and whatnot. I had friends on my block growing up in Queens where we went outside and we played superhero. Took the turn of like who's going to be Superman and who's going to be this and who's going to be that. And growing up with shows like the $6 Million Man and Bionic Woman and things like that, we all played that.
Played that. Yes.
We
Yes.
took what we saw on the screen and applied it to our own adventures growing up.
Right.
They don't do that anymore. Everything
Right.
is on the screen. No offense to your podcast, because I think I'm a huge fan of your podcast, so I watch it. But we're no longer of that age where you tell your kids to go out and play.
Right.
They're all inside, or on their phones playing games, or gaming has become a career. It's no longer, something for fun or, something you do when it's raining outside and you can't play outside. This is now an actual event. So it's taken away our ability to imagine because
Absolutely.
everything is given to us now. You don't have to think about how something spells. You can pick up your phone and ask the phone, how do you spell this?
Right.
And AI has just taken it a step further. So our own individual imaginations and communication skills
And mechanical skills. Yeah. I know for a little while we had a place where the power was out here and
mm,
then in New York City, and people had to resort to, you know, uh, non-digital ways of doing it. I can't even think of the word right now.
yeah,
That's how bad my mind is. But you know what I mean? Like we had to think of how do I, use a calculator now? Or how do I add these, a
right,
calculator that's not digitally connected?
right.
How do I add these two? Or what's the sales tax manually to
Mm-hmm.
add? And some people can't even do that anymore because everything's been automated. Everything's in a way where there's no creativity or you don't have to do anything anymore.
Exactly.
We've lost it.
The comic Sinbad had a stand up years and years and years ago. And he joked about it at the time that walking into McDonald's, you don't have to add anything anymore. You got the pictures of the food there and it calculates it for you. So we've, in terms of advancing in technology, have decreased our own brain power
Right.
by relying on AI and computers and calculators to do our work for us. I grew up with a grandmother to the day she died. She could do long division and calculation in her head.
Mm.
I remember going to, and I'm dating myself now, AMP and Pathmark and all of that,
Right, right.
following my mother and my grandmother on a Saturday morning, going to like 8 different grocery stores to get the best value for everything.
Right. Yeah, of course.
And my grandmother would have a cart full of stuff, and she would calculate to the penny before we even got to the register. And it amazed me every time. Now I can't do that. I'll be the first person to tell you I am not really great at math. But the idea that we can think for ourselves, we can actually function without the use of something digital telling us how to do something or what to do is something I hold dear. I keep that to this day. And yeah, it may age me and I may get talked about by my younger friends, but I'd like to know that I can keep my brain power going because that's the other part of it, where our brains are deteriorating faster because we're not using them as much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even it goes to, certain games, like you said, gamers, the digital games versus
Mhm.
even the board games that
Yeah,
people used to play, the strategy, or
yeah,
chess or checkers. It takes your brain power to do those type of things. And we've sort of lost that. We've
yeah.
lost that.
There's a commercial out now. I think it's a Meta commercial where the girl says, "Okay, Meta, what move should I make with chess?"
Mhm. Right. Right.
Really? That's how far we've come now.
That's
Is that
it.
I don't even have to strategize anymore, as you just said. I have AI now to think for me, so why do I have to think? And
Absolutely.
that's the scary part about how we're going forward. That's the frightening part to me, is
Right.
that we're losing that imagination. We're losing that sense of self because we're
Absolutely.
being told who we are now.
Well, your book smoothly takes us into that. And I want you to tell us a little bit about your book. It's called Coven.
Yes. Kevin, and it's not about witches, so I want to it is an anagram. Um, Coven it's a fictional story based on a factual organization. In the 60s and 70s, there was a government sponsored organization called SCANIT, and they actually utilized people who tested positive in ESP to spy, if you will, on Russia during the Cold War. Um, the program was shut down and kind of mothballed. My book kind of picks up on where they shut it down and carries it fictionally into the future, and where we have a group who not only possesses ESP powers, but they all possess various powers.
Mm.
Like I said, I was a Marvel kid growing up. So Stan Lee was my hero as a child. Um, and so it takes that group and puts them in the position of being the counterterrorism organization at the time. That is also subsequently disbanded by the government and picks up years later where one of the characters is actually brought back to train the next generation of the organization that is now privately run. But there's a reason he was specifically brought back out of all the group that there was before. There was a reason that he himself was brought back to train this next generation. And it kind of unfolds as the book progresses to why he was brought back. And it dives very much into, our sense of self, our sense of identity, and our sense of humanity
Mm.
once we realize, everything is not as it seems to be. So,
That's
hopefully
kind of what my next question was going to be. What is the message behind this all for you?
the message behind it basically is be vigilant. We're fed information constantly, as we just
As
saw.
we just said, yeah, yeah.
And so the message in the book is very much be your own person, understand who you are, um, take the time to really get a sense of self, because somebody will take that away from you quickly. And if you allow it, you'll never get that sense of self back. And once you understand who you are and what your grounding base is, the things that open up to you that you then perceive to be reality are very different to what you're being told is your reality.
I like that. I like that. Any parts of this book you see related to a reality? Like, is there part of it? I know it's fictional and fantasy, but is there any kind of parallel?
Um, there are certain characters in the book that are based on people I know, people that are very close to me. There's a little bit of myself in the book in terms of character perception. In general, yes, it's fantasy and fictional, but there are elements. I've taken elements of people that I know that I grew up with, that I was close to, and put them into these characters in order to get a sense of personality as to how they operate and how they operate together and individually.
How do you sit down and generate a story like this? Where does it come from?
It's funny. When I was a songwriter, my mother used to ask me, "How do you just pull music and lyrics out of thin air?" Right? The simple truth is, I have no idea. Honest. Um, like I said, I wanted to write something that I thought I would enjoy reading, and that's where the idea for the book came from. Um, how the storyline progressed, that was research. Once I figured out what I wanted to write, it then became research as to, this other organization, this very real organization, and how could I take that and push it forward? What's the story I could take from that where it became personal, but it was fictional? And that's kind of where it comes from. I guess it's just, we always say that what we used to call just talented people, now we call creatives, as you are.
Right, right.
We operate on a different wavelength than most people. We don't think in linear terms. When you're creative, your mind expands to a point where you function outside of reality. You function in a space where what you want to perceive as reality becomes reality, because
Yes.
you create it.
Yeah.
You foster that idea of what should be and manifest it in whatever creative form you have.
It's literally thinking outside the box. It's
It's
what it is.
literally
It's
thinking,
thinking
yes,
outside. Yeah. Yeah.
yes, exactly. Literally thinking outside the box. I've
Hmm.
seen you in roles that you've done on TV shows and things like that, where
Hmm.
it's completely different to the person I see when I watch your podcasts. So it's that kind of imagination that fosters putting a story together, things like that, or putting a song together, putting a play or a movie together. It's your imagination. And that's why it bothers me when I see technology taking that away from us, because it's the imagination that fuels the future, quite
Right.
honestly.
Yeah.
If we didn't have people who had imaginations, then we wouldn't have engineers that created a lot of the things that are pushing technology forward. Um, I said to somebody the other day, don't sleep on Disney, because a lot of things they had in Disney World, like as with previous world fairs, fostered a lot of technology we use today. Flat screen TVs, cars that drive themselves,
Yeah.
drive themselves, cars that hover. All of this came from somebody's imagination. And, it's great that technology has pushed us forward where it's easier to create these things. However, it's also taken away our ability to think of it first
Right.
in order to have it be creative.
Right. To go back, like we said, to strategize and challenge ourselves
Right.
to do something different, to think outside the box. That's
Exactly.
all being taken away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's kind of what the message is in the book. It's, understand your reality, understand your personal perception of what's real, because anybody can tell you anything and you'll go through, and believe it.
I believe it.
It's
Yeah.
other to open your eyes. And, I think the word woke has gotten a really bad, it's been completely turned into something negative. And it's not. All it is exactly that. It's to realize that we are all individuals. We all have a foundation in humanity. And it's a respect of all of us.
That's a beautiful thing. The respect of all humanity.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is your first book.
Yeah.
What are your hopes? What are you looking to do?
Um, I hope it spurs people's curiosity to see what happens to all, if not some of these characters once the book ends. I have already started working on the sequel. So
Good, yeah.
hopefully this will interest people enough to want to see what happens next. I've had a few people question who actually gotten to the end of the book already. It was like, okay, well, what happens to this person? The way it ends is like, okay, it's leaving it open for something. So what's going on? I'm like, you gotta wait.
Gotta wait
So
for part two.
gotta wait for part two.
Yeah, yeah.
So hopefully it will gain enough traction that people will be interested enough to see something else or something more come from it.
I love
I'm
it.
praying on it. So
Well, I gotta say the pieces and the passages that I've read are incredible, and I'm definitely looking, to read more and to get the copy as well. Um, where can we find it? Where do you have it out now?
it is on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Books of Plenty, pretty much anywhere online books are sold. I am in the process of getting it into independent bookstores, starting the beginning of the year. So hopefully by mid-January, I'll have it in a few actual bookstores that you can go and pick up a copy. But yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, where most people have been getting it so far. That I've gotten messages and I've gotten information from my publisher. That's where a lot of traction is coming from.
Okay.
I have my own copies I can sell. So
And how can we reach you?
you can reach
What's the best way?
me. Uh,
Stephen Mark Author at
Stephen Mark
Gmail.
Author, yeah, Stephen Mark Author at gmail.com.
Okay.
Stephen Mark Author on Facebook. Um, I'm also S. Jackson on Facebook, which I published it under Stephen Mark because that was the name my mother gave me. I have my own individual page, which is Keno Jackson on Facebook. Keno was the name my father gave me. So, I use Stephen because again, my mother was the writer. So that side of my personality, I'll defer to her on all that. Yeah,
I like that.
that's
And I also know that we talked about this before, but you're a creative. You have a whole nother creative side to you, but we'll have you back on the podcast for that as well. But
Yes,
this book,
yes.
yeah, as we can see, those who know,
Those who don't know,
but you
right?
got to tune into
Exactly.
this sequel to find out what it is.
There you go.
Right?
I absolutely love to come back on. I appreciate it.
I like that. So everyone, please make sure you pick up the copy of C.O.V.E.N. You can find it on Amazon Books. You can find it in some bookstores, more coming soon. You can also reach him direct at at gmail.com. That's StephenMarkAuthor at gmail.com. And also find him on Facebook or Keno Jackson as well. I want to thank you for coming on the show. Anything else you'd like to tell the people about your first book? I'm excited about it.
I'm excited about it. It's, I know these days for a lot of people, it's people dropping books like, like putting on a pair of shoes. So I get that it's very much the norm these days. For me, this has been a labor of love. It's been a project of mine for the last 10 years. I'm very excited about it. I was excited to get the first copy in my hands and see it, in print. And just, if you miss that level of imagination of, like when we used to read the Harry Potter books and we were able to visualize it before the movie came out, pick up Covenant and take a trip with me.
There you go. You heard it here first. 10 years, labor of love. The book is called Covenant. Make sure you pick that up by Stephen Mark Author. I'm Marcos Luis. Everybody, thank you for joining me for OneMicNite. We have the best guests. And thank you for joining me here and spending some time, because time is the most valuable thing we have. So I appreciate you. Also, make sure you like this episode. Drop down, give us a like. If you're watching on Facebook, make sure you give us a couple of stars, because it's a hard thing to do, this podcast. I'm doing it by myself. I appreciate you. I'll see you here soon. Happy holidays.